The European Commission Directorate General for Climate Action is happy to present the EU's first biennial transparency report at this facilitative multilateral consideration of progress. The EU and its 27 member states cover a wide range of climate zones. As other areas in the world, the EU is experiencing a surge in extreme weather events such as severe and widespread impact as droughts, flash floods, devastating storms, and hurricanes. Under the EU Green Deal, the EU and its 27 member states have committed to making the EU climate neutral by 2050 and create a competitive, resilient, and green economy. Under the Paris Agreement, the EU and its 27 member states have jointly submitted an economy-wide nationally determined contribution for 2021 to 2030, which is a single-year legally binding net domestic emission reduction target of at least minus 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. This target is to be met domestically without the use of international credits and is enshrined in the EU climate law, which sets the framework for the EU and its member states to transition to climate neutrality. The EU and its member states will reach their emission targets with the legally binding annual emission levels under the three main instruments covered by the EU ETS directive, the effort sharing and the LULUCF regulations, and the essential policies to implement the Fit for 55 legislative framework. In 2023, the EU net greenhouse gas emissions were 37.3% lower than their 1990 level and down by 1,228 megatons of CO2 equivalent, while sustaining a 70% GDP increase over the same period. This reduction is also materialized on the EU NDC target. In 2022, down by 30%, and in 2023 by 36%. The latest aggregated projections from member states in their final National Energy and Climate Progress Report show that the EU and its member states are on track to meet their 2030 target with a 1 percentage point above the minus 55. This requires the full implementation by member states of both the current and planned policies and measures. Accelerating the decarbonization of the energy sector will have a spillover effect to other sectors and is crucial to achieving climate neutrality. In 2023, emissions from the energy sector accounted for 76% of the EU's total greenhouse gas emissions, while recording a 37% drop compared to 1990. The EU is committed to reducing emissions from power generation, industrial manufacturing, aviation and international maritime through its emission trading system by 62% by 2030, and to increase the share of renewable energy by at least 42.5% by 2030. Recent data show that the energy supply sector presents the largest decrease in greenhouse gas emissions since 1990, with an 18% drop between 2023 and 2022. The latest data show that emissions from installations under the ETS are well on track to meet its 2030 target. The industry sector is central to the EU's economy and for the decarbonization of the energy system. The industrial sector accounts for a little bit more than 20% of total greenhouse gas emissions, with 58% from fuel combustion, 42% from industrial processes. The chemical industry showed the largest emission decrease with a reduction of 69% between 1990 and 2023. Overall, in 2023, the sector achieved a 46.4% reduction in emissions compared to 1990. Effective policies and measures are essential for reducing emissions in the energy sector. Therefore, the EU is complementing its effective carbon pricing with additional policies and measures to promote energy efficiency, innovative and clean technology, diversification of energy supply, and clean energy sources. The transport sector accounts for one quarter of the total greenhouse gas emissions, surpassing the energy sector and becoming the largest emitting sector in the EU in 2023. The domestic road transport is responsible for most of transport emissions, and more than 70% of road emissions originate from passenger cars and vans. The EU directive setting CO2 emission performance standards for new passenger and cars and vans will bring emissions in line with the EU ambition to reach climate neutrality by 2050. By setting increasingly stringent targets for average CO2 emissions for new cars and vehicles, this incentivized the automotive industry to innovate and produce more fuel-efficient and low-emission vehicles. To further support emission reduction in the transport sector, a new EU emission trading system called ETS2 is covering transport, building, and other small industries, will expedite the shift to low and zero emission vehicles by surpassing infrastructure and charging stations funded by the social fund with the EU ETS2 revenues. Building play a key role in the EU long-term strategy on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. 85% of buildings in the EU were built before 2000, and 75% have poor energy performance. Emissions from building sector account for nearly 15% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in 2023, of which 60% in residential building and 40% for commercial and industrial building. Even though emissions in the building sector have decreased by 38.6% since 1990, with most reduction occurring after 2005, it accounts for 40% of the energy consumed in the EU. The EU has introduced the Energy Efficiency Directive, intending to bring down final energy consumption by 11.7%, which, coupled with the revised Energy Performance of Building Directive and the emission trading system for buildings, are the right combination to incentivize gradual emission reduction by promoting higher energy efficiency for existing buildings, cleaner energy sources, and shifting to low and zero emission buildings. This will ensure the projected emissions will be on track for its 2030 target. The agriculture sector plays a vital role for the EU's transition to a net zero economy, deeply intertwined with people's life and sustainable lifestyle. The sector accounts for 12% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, of which two-thirds for livestock. Removals are a crucial element of the equation to reach the 2030, and the revised land use and land use change and forestry regulation has set a target to increase removals by 42 megaton CO2 equivalent by 2030 with integrated flexibility in provisions. The EU's commitment to reducing agriculture emissions is reflected by policies and measures as the Common Agriculture Policy, an EU methane strategy, and the Carbon Removal and Carbon Farming Regulation. The EU and its member states are major providers of climate finance to help developing countries with their mitigation and adaptation efforts. but also for technical and financial support for the full implementation of the enhanced transparency framework. The EU will continue promoting and working with partners to unlock private capital. Now, looking beyond 2030, the climate ministers agreed on a 19% net greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2040 compared to 1990 level and an indicative NDC between 66.25% and 72.5%, setting out a vision for the EU beyond 2030. Thank you for your attention, and we are looking forward for our dialogue.